Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Beyond Ourselves. It feels like kind of forgotten about. I've forgotten about this podcast. No, it's been I think since November. I think the last week of November was when I uploaded my last episode. And for those of you who don't know, I'm applying to grad school for marriage and family therapy, and so I was doing those applications until they were all due in January. But I wanted the Christmas break to be with family and not have that looming over me. So I was working really diligently the last week of November and the first couple of weeks of December to finish that. And so I kind of had to put the podcast on hold. And then my sister was au pairing in France for a few months. And so she came back during the holidays, and I just wanted to spend time with her and my mom and see some friends who were in town. And so now that it's the beginning of the new year, I am finished with grad applications, looking uh, to no avail yet for a job. So I am very unemployed, and this is kind of my creative outlet, and something that has really been bringing me a lot of joy. And so with this episode, I really wanted to, well, but before I start with kind of what I wanted to talk about with this episode, I wanted to share that I have my next guest secured. It's Professor Dr. Farah Al Nakib, who is a history professor of Middle Eastern Studies at Cal Poly, who I only had one class with. I took her uh, Modern Middle East GE class, and it was one of my favorite classes that I took at Cal Poly. The way she was able to facilitate discussions with rich insight while also still being able to share so much of herself. Um, it was a really profound class, and I wasn't sure who I wanted to be my next guest. Like I'm really kind of just going by intuition mainly, and kind of just picking people that have made an imprint on me that I really find interesting and fascinating. And so I didn't know this, but she had written a book called Kuwait Transformed. She's originally from Kuwait, and a lot of her research, current and historical, centers around Kuwait. And so this book, and I'll give details about this in the show notes, as well as subsequent Instagram posts in preparation for the interview. But the interview, or the book, basically tracks Kuwait's history before and after the discovery of oil, and how oil kind of thrust the country extremely rapidly into modernity, and this urban development, the creation of suburbs, the creation of private, the privatization of a lot of their country, really fractured the social fabric, and really separated people, isolated people, oriented a lot more people towards materialism and money instead of communalism and social cohesion. And she really makes a claim that the kind of the biggest challenge of 21st century Kuwait, and this is something that is certainly not unique to Kuwait. I think in every country that's industrialized and industrializing, that's something that they struggle with, is how to reclaim that uh, sense of social cohesion. And I didn't know what to expect. Obviously, I knew that she was someone that I wanted to interview. I had no idea that the subject of our interview would be what this book was about. But I'm really excited for it. And I'm excited for all of you to hear it as well. Um, And so we were hoping to have the interview recorded yesterday, but with all of the storms, she's been out of power for the last couple days. I haven't heard back from her um, in a few days. I think she's still struggling with her internet. So when I know the date of that interview, I will definitely make an announcement about it. But yeah, I'm very excited for the new year and seeing where this podcast uh, will take me and how it will grow and how many people it will touch. Um, and that was kind of really what was the impetus for this episode. I really wanted to make an episode that first kind of discussed my journey to starting this podcast, why I'm interested in this topic of purpose and meaning, uh what potential answers I've been able to discover, what new questions um these first three interviews have taught me, what I've learned. And so I think this I really want this episode to kind of serve as a retroactive reflection on my life up until this point, um and a reflection on these first three episodes and what I've learned, what I've been able to take away, um and kind of what I hope to continue to provide going forward. And so I think if I trace back the breadcrumbs of my life, um I've I've always been I've always been fascinated by conversation. I've always loved talking to people. In school, pretty much every year that my elementary school would have parent teacher conferences, they would take my parents in and they would be like, "Yeah, he's a joy to have in class. He works hard. Um, he does all the assignments. He's very passionate, but we can't shut him up. Like we cannot get a hold of him." He's always talking to kids in the class. And I was never like, I was never obnoxious and I was never like just, I don't know. There were probably certainly times that I was very annoying and obnoxious, but I wasn't like a loud, like interrupting people, talking over people. But I always loved talking to people. I always loved learning about um what makes people who they are, why they're interested in what they're interested in. And I think, I think there was definitely that foundation there. But I think until very recently, um, that desire, that urge to connect with people would very easily get taken out of balance, where I would I would really seek the approval of other people, and that social anxiety and nervousness would stem from this like existential worry that I wasn't actually adequate, that I wasn't worth talking to the people that I was with, that I was somehow inferior. And I think in the last, few years, as I've become more conscious of that, my the depth of that interest in people has gone from wanting to make someone laugh or wanting to make someone impressed with me or flatter someone or whatever it might be, that is like this egoic desire. Now that depth is so much deeper, because I've in a sense made contact with my true intentions and motivations for being on this planet. And I think that's taken a lot of intentional work, a lot of dark nights of the soul, a lot of journaling, a lot of therapy, um where I've really kind of come to this place that through deep, meaningful relationships and dialogue, my existence on this planet is justified. And I've seen time and time again how, and I think we look at dialogue and conversation as as primarily what you can share, what you can bring through your words to a conversation, whether that be your own experiences or advice that you can impart to someone. And I think that's an incorrect, incomplete way of looking at conversation. Listening is as important, I think more important, because I think true attuned listening affords dialogue and conversation. If you are truly listening to someone, it means that you're not addicted to a thought in your head. The thoughts that might be percolating in your mind, you're not consciously aware of if you are truly listening to every word that someone says. And then from that place, you can really make contact with how their words are landing with you, how you're feeling, how you are reacting to that, how it's resonating with you. Um, and then I think beautiful dialogue can happen from there. And so that was really the impetus for this podcast. Like, I kind of had a vague idea of the types of people that I would want to bring on, but I also didn't want to pigeonhole myself into only talking to like spiritually, like therapists or healers or uh, you know, like people who are in that spiritual, like, mindfulness psychology space. Like, I I truly believe that the 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 thirst and the hunger for purpose and meaning is a universal human desire. I don't think that's a very profound thing to say. um and I think by having as like kind of like macro, like maximalist look on things as possible, it can reach a lot more people. Because I think if I'm only, if I'm only collecting a certain sector of the population to be interviewed, then it can alienate and isolate a lot of people who say, oh well, I'm not a meditator, or I don't know how to meditate, or like I don't do yoga, or people who kind of have a knee jerk negative reaction to anything religious or esoteric or spiritual. Or like, if I can interview, I don't know, a construction worker and talk to him about his life, and or how he finds meaning, that then feels so much more practical and accessible and universal. And it also helps me to realize and deeply intuitively understand that core ethos of this, this path, that you know we're all on, that we're all committed to, of trying to live an integrated, connected life. And so, I think a worry of mine has been, like, making this podcast too, like, it not having a vision, it not having like a central guiding, like, okay, this is the type of person that I want to interview. This is like what I'm trying to uncover. Um, and 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 then, in that kind of like, ambiguous space, not being able to attract a consistent audience. Um, and I think what I've realized is if I if I can truly connect with the work, if I truly feel like each interview I came away from it having learned something that I hadn't, that I wasn't aware of before the interview. And if I really made a human connection with the person that I'm interviewing, and it moved beyond simply a dictation, like a facilitation of their work. If there was this like mutual reciprocal connection where, you know, I'm taking time to let things resonate with me, and and continue to be curious and ask open-ended questions. Like if I really feel like each interview achieves that goal, um, then I think people are willing to absorb and get enriched by valuable conversations like that. Um, and I think, I'm also I'm also of the mind that if we get crippled by expectations of others, um, we don't be creative. We're not creative. You know we're stonewalled by that fear of rejection, or fear that our work isn't going to be appreciated or misunderstood. And I'm doing this podcast, like, obviously for, in hope that it reaches people, and in hopes that people derive valuable practical insights from it. But that's also out of my control. I can't control how something lands or doesn't land for someone. And so all that I can all that I can do is put out the best product that I can. Um and so, with that being said, like, I think the first 3 interviews, I had a lot of time to reflect after my last interview with Dr. Alanis, you know, in the last month or so, that I wasn't making any. And I was really curious, like, what are the potential common themes between the three? Like, if excuse me, if I could kind of synthesize everything that I learned from my 3 guests, um, what would that be? Are there any things that overlap? And I think what something that was really kind of like interesting for me to kind of uh work with was this idea that structural macro level change starts with individual change. That if we look at a social issue, a broad social issue, and it's very easy to get overwhelmed by the logistics of it, by the bureaucracy of it, by the policies involved, by these like big, powerful institutions and players that a lot of times aren't willing to compromise, aren't willing to work with one another. Um, there's inefficiencies left, right, and center, and that kind of alienating a lot of like individual actors who say, well, if the Reds and the Blues aren't going to be able to work together towards any common goal, how? And like, the opposite side is cold and callous and uncompromising, and uh unempathetic to us. Like, how are we going? How is any change going to be possible? And I think I've definitely been guilty of that. Of um, really not like really caring about the world, uh, but unsure how to start. And I think particularly Dr. Alanis's interview, he talks so much about how the successful resettlement community prioritized social health over, you know, infrastructure development, and how there was this like external NGO that came in that was obviously concerned with like building schools and building hospitals and like building institutions where you know people would be able to run a successful society. But they were like, hey, like, these people are deeply traumatized. They have just been displaced from their homes. Everything that they've ever known is gone. A lot of them might have had family members that passed away during the hurricane. Um, but regardless, even if their families are fully intact, they have been rocked by this natural disaster. And that's not going to just remedy itself immediately. Um, those people need care and compassion and consideration, um, and also a structured, like, way of life and social norms that they can orient themselves to. But the way that that resettlement community was able to be successful was on an individual and family level. People's emotional states being recognized and acknowledged, um and then from there people felt empowered to change, because they weren't just going through the motions of building a school and like not talking about what had just happened and how they are now with a group of strangers who don't know each other, who now have to work with each other. And if you just push the feelings and the trauma aside, um, people are going to fall into old patterns of habit. In the other resettlement community, like, delinquency and crime were rampant, and the NGO essentially felt powerless over that situation. And so that, like, taking the wisdom from that interview and coupling it with the interview that I had with my therapist, where he talks so much about self acceptance being the driving force behind change. And this kind of like paradoxical idea of, in order for us to change something that we are unhappy with, we have to accept the very thing we are trying to change. And I've certainly felt that, being a client of his. Like, the first session, it just felt like this warm hug. Um, and all the things that I was trying to run away from were appreciated. It wasn't some innate failure of mine, but it was a product of my upbringing and a product of social programming. And, like, of course, given the background that I had, I was going to think the things that I did about myself. And I think the world needs that. The world doesn't need more money at problems. And and genius. I mean, certainly there's a space for technological innovation and creative policy making and all of those things. Without without that, there are certain problems that demand that. I think every problem to a certain degree demands that. But if you don't have people who deeply understand the why of what they're doing and haven't made contact with themselves at a core level, um, and haven't been shown the power of deeply attuning and listening to others, um, when we fall into our monkey brain impulsive warring like tendencies, we will not have something that we have accessed and know that we can readily access that transcends that to 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 go back to. um and we will not be able to separate that impulsive drive from who we really are. um I just 2 days ago, I attended this collaborative group conversation event called Circling. It was created by this brilliant guy, Guy Sengstock, like 25 years ago or so. And it's essentially this method of dialogue, um, that's predicated on listening and responding instead of trying to fix and give advice. Um, and I actually want to make an episode about my experience and kind of the philosophy of the circling method. It was like so deeply profound and completely altered and changed, um what I imagine is possible when you are seen and when you are able to see someone else deeply. Um, and so I think that's probably where I'll leave this episode. And again, I'm so appreciative of everyone who has given me feedback already, given me, you know, encouraging words, and I really hope that all of you who have listened thus far have gained something, um, that you've been able to apply into your own life. I think these interviews for me, I think that the most beautiful part has been uncovering things that I didn't even think I would learn, but before the interview starts. And that's really where I think the magic in conversation comes from, is preparing, sure, um, but opening yourself up to the possibility to be changed. And so with that, I'm looking forward to recording this next episode on the my experience with circling, um, and the next episode with Dr. Al Nakib. And I thank you all for the support this far, and I hope you continue to listen and continue to share it with friends and family, and have this community grow. Thank you.